I already started. Whenever y'all ready.
Yep, gotcha. So this is our external assessment presentation by me, Glenn, Wout, Bailey, and Piyush. Our company is Nike. They operate in the sports apparel industry. Brand is very important in this industry because it brings loyalty and high switching costs, which we'll explain later going to the presentation. The sports apparel industry manufactures, designs, and sells athletic apparel and footwear for sports and physical activities. They've experienced growth in the recent years in this industry. Their market was about 319 billion in 2022, and it's expected to reach above 400 billion in 2028. So the dimensions of inclusion for the industry, there's 4 criteria. They have to be in some type of athletic sports, training, fitness, or running. So all of the companies that are included in the next slide deal with one of these criteria. As you can see, we have Mizuno, Anta, Lining, Lululemon, New Balance, Asics, Fila, Brooks, Adidas, On Cloud, Puma, Under Armour, Reebok, and Nike. So these are all companies in the industry that deal with one of those 4 criteria that we named. For the direct competitors, they have to compete both in apparel and footwear. These companies are Adidas, Under Armour, Puma, Reebok, New Balance, and Fila. Again, they have to be competing in apparel and footwear in order to be a direct competitor. Now, as we go to the indirect competitors, they focus on either apparel or footwear. So they deal with either or. This is On Cloud, Anta, Asics, Lululemon, Brooks, Lining, and Mizuno. So companies that are not included in the industry, so we wanted to make sure you see a clear picture of who's in the industry and who's not. So I'll make sure to explain why these companies are not included in the industry. Columbia Sportswear, they deal with outdoor wear. This is coats, jackets. Marucci, they deal with sports equipment, so they're not included in the industry. Gap, they're on retail, so they sell their own clothes. Johnson and Murphy sells men's dress shoes, so they're not included in the industry. VF Corporation, they deal with outside wear shoes, and also Merrell's as well. They deal with outside wear shoes like hiking and boots as well. So now we will talk about the business to business business model. So there's retailers and wholesalers who are the customers of Nike. As you can see, for customer service, Foot Locker has about 70% of their store of Nike. They understand how big Nike is in brand. Same thing with Dick's Sporting Goods. They have Adidas, Under Armour, Nike, all those big brands in their stores because they understand that these are big brands and they want to get consumers to go to their store. And also the quality of the product and brand management as well. They want the best products in their stores. They understand the brand awareness and what brings customers into their stores. So as we said, brand is big in this industry. And then as you can see, the customers of Nike understand that as well. So now we'll talk about the direct-to-consumer model, or DTC business model. This is mainly from e-commerce and apps. So it goes straight from Nike to the consumer. So they can go on the app and get whatever they want, and it goes straight to the consumer. It doesn't go through any retailer or wholesaler. As you can see, consumers want these brands for sports performance. They want to enhance their performance. People want to stay active. So that's why they want these brands and the products of these brands. So these are just the products of the brands of the industry. As you can see, they have sweatshirts, shoes, cleats, uniforms, shirts, socks, cleats. So these are a bunch of the products of the industry. So now we would get to the supply chain. This industry is embracing the digital supply chain. So they're shifting from the traditional supply chain to the digital supply chain. As you can see in the pic, right, there's a chain of reaction in the traditional supply chain. So they're shifting from this supply chain to the digital. As you can see on the right of the picture, right? So there's one network and it's going to the consumer, as we mentioned, direct to consumer, and then it goes to the supplier, it goes to the retailer, it goes to the distributor. So there's different areas in which it's going to. This helps with agility, it decreases your inventory, and it helps decrease your cost of goods sold as well. And another big thing is consumer demand and personalization. So people want their shoes to be personalized. They want different colors. They want their own designs on their shoes. So this is why they're shifting from the traditional to the digital supply chain as well. And Adidas then said, okay, we're going to do 3D printing to reduce our manufacturing and production periods as well.
So we're going to talk about the Porter's 5 forces. In order to conduct business in any industry, we need to understand the ins and outs of the industry, which will help us to understand the opportunities and threats in the industry. Porter's 5 forces is an analysis tool that will help us in understanding how we can compete in the industry and become successful. We will talk about the 5 forces in the next slides in details. So the first force is bargaining powers of the supplier. There are 3 kinds of suppliers that we have in this industry. We'll talk about the influencers that have the platform and the audience to help promote our products. Their bargaining power would be considered to be moderate, depending on their public reputation and the volume of their influence and audience. A brand's goal would be to get the best influencer and promote their product, which can put more bargaining power in the hands of the influencers. Another kind of suppliers that we have in this industry would be the labor and human resources. They are considered to have low to moderate bargaining power depending on their roles in the company. For example, a person who is just assembling the shoe would not have a high bargaining power as any other person can do their job. But a person who has been a successful designer for the brand or for shoes or clothing, etc., would have more bargaining power in this scenario. Lastly, we can talk about the suppliers that supply raw materials to the industry, and their bargaining power would be considered to be low, as there are many suppliers that supply to established brands such as Nike, Adidas, and these established brands can easily replace these suppliers, and which is why the raw material suppliers would prioritize the relation with these big brands instead of bargaining for the profits. So the next we will talk about is the threat of new entrants. Threat of new entrants in such industry would be low to moderate, as the industry has a lot of barriers to entry in case of new brands are getting into competition with direct competition with established brands such as Nike or Adidas, unless they can find a specialty or niche. It is also hard to achieve true differentiation because most brands in the industry have similar products and product lines. As we can see that, also we can see that 24% of the revenues in this industry, or for the most companies in this industry, go to overhead expenses, which include R&D costs, which tell us that this industry, we have to spend money to make money, and which can be tough for new brands coming into the industry. If the new companies can find their target market and specialize in a particular niche, then they might be able to be successful companies such as Lululemon or OnCloud did with targeting the women's yoga wear and yoga pants. The next we'll talk about would be bargaining power of the buyers. So in this industry, there are two kinds of buyers. The buyers such as B2B, which would be these buyers would be academies, sports goods, or Dick's Sporting Goods, which have comparatively higher bargaining power than the individual consumers, because they help us make sales and give us shelf space in their stores, retail stores, where our products are available to the end consumers. They make profits by selling our products, but at the same time, they have a good bargaining power because they have the potential to become our competitors if they come together and build their own product lines. Bargaining power of individuals would be so B2C would be the end consumers. They would have a lower bargaining power than B2B because they are the one who are actually making the decision to which product to buy from or which company to buy from. In such situations, customer loyalty can help us neutralize this threat, and that is why they might have a little less bargaining power than B2B buyers. The next force that we'll talk about will be threat of substitutes. There's an increasing threat of substitutes because there are other brands producing similar products. Apart from that, main threat comes from counterfeit products that are getting popular in recent times. Recent news show that they found over $2 million worth of fake Nike shoes in the Los Angeles area. This can not only take the customers away, but can also damage the brand reputation due to the inferior quality. Another threat of substitute comes from mainstream brands such as Walmart or other similar brands, which have inferior quality compared to our products, but they do offer the same products at much cheaper price, which can be more attractive to some customers, and they can take the customers away from the industry or from the brands. Next, we'll talk about the intensity of rivalry. In this industry, the major market share is controlled by the more established brands such as Nike, Adidas, Puma. And these companies are always looking for opportunities to grow their operations and innovate new products. Having an intense competition, there's only 4% growth rate in the industry. That means it is tough to get new customers to the industry at a rapid pace. This intensifies the competition, as if one brand loses, the other brand wins. For example, if Nichols terminates their relation with Adidas, Nike and Under Armour can easily seize this opportunity and make relations with many colleges or other sporting organizations. Also, many of the brands have similar product lines, which makes it really tough to achieve true differentiation. Changes in technology and consumer preferences also plays an important role in increasing competition in this industry.
So when we look at the external factors facing, or the industry facing the external factors, we can look at three main elements. We can look at the opportunities, the threats, and the KSFs, or the key success factors. We'll go over topics like inflation, new trends, but most importantly, the factors that the company needs to gain a competitive advantage within the industry. So we can start with looking at the opportunities in the industry. And the first opportunity that we determined as a group was the new trends. This industry is modernizing quickly, and there are some new trends that come along with that modernization. Before, companies only used athletes as endorsers, but we now see more and more influencers and social media personalities being endorsed by members in this industry. For example, Adidas has the influencer program, and Kevin Hart makes the commercials for Fabletics. Also, social media marketing has become a trend in this industry. As we see in the bottom right picture, Adidas posts on Instagram about their new designs and when they will be available for purchase, both in stores and online, which will get me to the next opportunity, which is the DTC, or the direct-to-consumer sales. By one click on a post, you get directly led to the online store and the products shown on the social media posts by Adidas, for example, in this case. And by DTC, Adidas skips a step in the supply chain by selling directly to the consumer instead of the retail store. Another new trend in this industry is the increase in overall demand for sustainable products. With an overall increase in awareness for the climate change, people care more and more about what the products are made of, how they are made, and where they come from. Studies show that 86% of organizations within this industry have announced CO2 reduction plans, and consumers are also willing to pay premium prices for products that are sustainable, which can be an opportunity for industry members. Also, artificial intelligence is becoming more and more used in the industry. AI can be used in various ways, for example, to analyze customer preferences or by helping to design new products. AI can make many complex processes less complicated and be executed more efficiently. Lastly, the industry demand for versatile and multifunctional clothing has increased as well, and industry members can use this new trend to implement new lines of clothing and charge premium prices for these versatile pieces of clothing. Then, the second opportunity in this industry are the endorsements and sponsorships. This can be of professional athletes, sport leagues, college sports, and professional teams. And like I mentioned earlier, also influencers. By endorsing athletes, people will see their favorite athlete perform in your clothing brand, and every sports fan wants to be like their favorite athlete. And this includes clothing. Athletes wearing your brand creates brand recognition, which is very important in this industry. By sponsoring college sports, you will also create brand recognition. Some brands also prefer to sponsor individual college athletes through NIL deals. College sports sells a lot of merchandise, which generates revenue. And an example of this, which I will touch on later, is Nike's new partnership with Fanatics, which is a company that purely sells merchandise for fans. Like these brands sponsoring universities, brands can also sponsor leagues, like, for example, the NFL or the NHL, stuff like that. But also other professional sports teams in the rest of the world. All of these sponsorships and endorsements are examples of how brands can promote themselves. The third and final opportunity that we determine in this industry are the upcoming and new sports, such as, for example, paddle and pickleball. Paddle, which is shown in the right top picture, is the fastest growing sport all around the world, and its participation rate is expected to grow for 22% for each of the next 5 years. Besides paddle, there's another racket sport that is gaining a lot of popularity and definitely a lot in the US, which is pickleball, which is shown on the right bottom of the screen. Pickleball's participation rate has grown more than 150% over the last 3 years, and the market for pickleball apparel is expected to grow by 680 million for the coming 3 years. New sports like these give the opportunity for brands to enter these new sub-markets and offer specialized gear. Both pickleball and paddle requires specialized equipment, which can be an opportunity for this industry members as well. We can now take a look at the threats facing the industry. And the first threat is the supply chain, which is a very complex one, but the real threat in this situation is the relationship with China. First, the unavailability of cotton and petroleum derivatives causes a concern for this industry. Those raw materials are essential for the production of apparel and footwear. And while there's a shortage, suppliers of this industry must still compete for accessibility of these materials. Besides the raw materials unavailability, we also see a lot of congestion issues in the US ports. Daily container capacity in the US ports have decreased by 14% between 2020 and 2022. This is mainly due to the WRO, or the Withhold Release Order, which is an order that will not let products enter the US unless it's proven that they were not made by forced labor. And with most of the production taking place in Asia, where still a lot of forced labor exists, this can become an issue in the future. Because of the issues mentioned in the slide, the supply chain issues become only worse. The supply chain in this industry is very complex, as I mentioned earlier. It goes from planning to design to sourcing, manufacturing, quality control, and eventually the distribution to either customers or directly to the consumer. With current issues in sourcing the raw materials, congestion in US ports, and many other issues like, for example, trucker shortages, will result in long delays and waiting times for consumers, but also the organization itself. Lastly, the biggest threat for the industry members is the relationship between the US and China. This relationship is extremely important for the industry, as almost all products must be imported from Asia. Manufacturing costs is another concern, which goods are being produced in Asia, and these costs can change at any time if, for example, conversion rates changes. A decrease in the US dollar or an increase in the value of Asian currencies can cause profit destruction. Then secondly is the inflation that forms a threat for the industry. Surveys have shown that people plan to spend around 30% less on apparel and around 30% less for athletic footwear. These numbers, however, all depend on age and income level. Also, the industry was very resilient during the pandemic, while other industries suffered. The sports and apparel industry saw an increase in consumer spending of around 37 percentage points, as we can see on the graph on the right top corner. Although consumer spending in the industry has increased, a big part of that was due to inflation. Besides inflation, also the health of retail stores can be a threat for this industry. For example, if two or more retail powerhouses like Foot Locker and Dick's Sporting Goods, for example, would combine, their bargaining power would increase drastically. This is a threat definitely for a company like Nike, who gets 50% of their revenue through retail stores. Then the last threat that we determined is the changes in consumer preferences. Since it's such a modernized industry with a lot of influence from social media, consumer preferences can change drastically and within seconds. In recent years, consumer preferences have shifted to the yoga culture, where, for example, Lululemon is the most popular brand for this style. Also, apparel with utility and technical details become increasingly popular in the industry. You see, for example, the yellow Fila jacket in the right top, which is not for any athletic activities, but more fashion and design related. Besides the consumer preferences that change over time, the consumers themselves change as well. The US population of 65 and older accounted for almost 17% of the total population, but is expected to double the amount by 2040. We all know that being active becomes harder by the older you get, and with an aging population in the US, the demand for products will shift. Looking forward, brands will have to focus and invest on aging consumers. Industry members must be very agile to be able to adjust to these possible quick changes in consumer preferences. Although we have identified this as a threat, changing consumer preferences can also become an opportunity if the company identifies these changes quickly. They can exploit these changes if they identify them before their competitors. If you do not identify these changes, it will almost certainly cause for profit destruction. Now, having talked about the opportunities and threats that the industry face, we now get to the KSFs, or the key success factors. We have ordered them based on the importance that we think is important for the organizations in this industry. And we think the most important KSF for this sports apparel industry is the right brand management and the ability to extend your brand. This refers to the strategy used by organizations to improve the way consumers perceive their brand. In other words, how do you want your consumer to think about your brand? In an industry where brand loyalty is extremely important, brands must create that loyalty in some way. This is done by certain marketing strategies that will make consumers choose your brand over that of another. Also, the ability to extend your brand and take advantage of new opportunities is key for success in this industry. Creating a new and innovative product and entering new markets or industries are all important qualities to possess. Examples of these are the Nike partnership with Fanatics that I mentioned earlier, or Nike has also recently come out with their own at-home powerlifting set. We determined the portfolio management as the second KSF for the athletic footwear and for the athletic apparel industry. Like Nike, who owns Converse, Hurley, International, and Jordan, there are many more other competitors who own subsidiaries like Adidas, who owns Reebok and TaylorMade. And for competitors within this industry, it is extremely important to manage each brand according to their consumer preferences. Also, acquiring companies increases the market share of an organization, which is a key in a very intense rivalry in the industry. Then the third KSF that we determined was the cost repression. Like I said, this is a industry with a high rivalry, and a lot of products and supplies have a similar price, which is why it is important to keep costs as low as possible in order to compete in this industry. Lastly, we think asset utilization is a key success factor to have. The higher this is, the more competitive you are. Industry members need cash, for example, for endorsements and sportsmanship contracts. They also need to keep inventory, which they want to turn over as much as possible. And they need warehouses where they keep their inventory. Then they need retail stores to turn over their inventory into sales. But retail stores only factors in for the direct competitors in the industry. Organizations want to keep warehouses and retail stores stocked to never run into any shortages. And they want to run these assets at full capacity to gain a competitive advantage in the industry.
So now we're going to look at the industry performance and the key performance indicators. The first one that we're going to look at is the brand recognition. For this, we're going to look directly at gross profit because brand recognition leads to customer loyalty, and loyalty can be measured at the top line at revenue. The more loyal your customers are and the better brand recognition that you have, the more your revenue will grow. And so the larger your gross profit will be. And if your brand recognition strategy is not working, then you'll see a decrease in the gross profit margins because revenue will decrease, but the cost of goods sold will stay the same. Opportunities and threats that we can measure with the gross profit margin are the endorsements. And so endorsements can be seen as an opportunity if you get the right endorsements, like LeBron James and Michael Jordan. You'll see your revenue increase, which will increase the gross profit margin. But if you get, a Kanye West or Tiger Woods, whose face is plastered on everywhere with the Nike logo, then it can hurt your brand recognition and hurt the loyalty that consumers have to your product. So here you can see the trend of the gross profit margin over time. And you can see that Nike actually has a lower gross profit margin over time when compared to the other competitors, and that Adidas has the highest gross profit margin over time. So now we're going to look at the brand extension. And for this, we're going to look at the revenue breakdown. And so at the pie chart, you can see the wholesale revenue breakdown for Nike. And you can see that Converse only makes up 3%, Jordan makes up 13%, and the rest of Nike makes up the rest of it. But there are threats and substitution that we can measure with the brand extension, and we can measure with wholesale revenue is by looking at the raw materials and the direct labor, because these will have a direct impact on our wholesale revenue, along with counterfeit goods will have a direct impact on our revenue. So portfolio management, and for this, we can measure this with market share and by looking at the breakdown of the geography and where the companies in our industry sell. And so in the bottom left, you can see the market share. Nike has over half of the market share in the industry. and then Adidas comes second with 26%. And so when you are doing a portfolio management, when you're managing your portfolio and you're adding brands to it, you will get a larger piece of the pie. And along with, if you are extending to new markets, for example, uh, Asia Pacific and Latin America has the smallest piece of revenue. If they start to go into that market and sell more, then they're also are going to get a bigger piece of the pie of the market share. And this also, you can measure the intensity of rivalry by looking at market share and who owns more market share. And then whenever you are competing in other other markets, then you'll see, the rivalry might not be as intense in other markets. For some companies like Nike in Greater China is not going to have a high intensity of rivalry. And then cost suppression. So we're going to measure the cost suppression with our operating profit margin. And we're going to use the operating profit margin instead of the net profit margin, because when we're talking about cost suppression, we don't really need to look at the interest expense or the taxes. And the operating profit margin will show how highly competitive this industry is. You can see everybody is right around the average. Adidas is pretty low and Nike is pretty high, though. But in this industry, because the uh, intensity of rivalry is so high, they have to be good at cost suppression to get a competitive advantage over the other competitors in the industry. So they have to reduce at the gross level, they have to reduce their cost of goods sold, and they have to lower their operating expenses. And here you can see the trends over time. Under Armour has a trend of having the lowest operating profit margin, even though they had the highest gross profit margin. And the reason everybody dropped in 2020 because of COVID, but the reason that Under Armour dropped negative is because they had restructuring charges. So asset utilization, we're going to use the fixed asset turnover to measure this, and we're going to look at the companies that do wholesale. So Nike, Under Armour, Puma, and Adidas all do wholesale, and you can see that they're all very similar, and they're all very similar in the net PP&E that they hold. But the threat of new entrants is high with regards to these companies because they do need this net PP&E to break into this wholesale world. Even though it only makes up 19% of Nike's net PP&E, is $7 billion. So breaking into that part of the industry is going to be difficult. We can also measure the threats of online shopping and the opportunities of wholesale and retail when looking at the fixed asset turnover. Because if you're better at wholesale, then your fixed asset turnover will increase. And online shopping is actually a threat and an opportunity because as these companies are already built to get into online shopping and new entrants can get into online shopping, but it's going to take away from their wholesale sales as well. So these are the comparable store sales. These are the sales when you look at their retail stores. And this is important to look at because these are, when you're looking at retail, if online shopping and wholesale is making more revenue than these and these numbers start to drop, then they may need to get out of retail because they're still taking on these large leases and all of this long-term debt to hold these retail stores. And so here we look at the revenue breakdown, and you can see that whenever we're looking at our direct competitors and our indirect competitors, only two of our direct competitors compete in e-commerce. But whenever you look at the indirect competitors, like Lululemon has 50% in online revenue, but they are all competing online. So this is the overall industry analysis. And when you look at all these numbers, you can see that Nike is the leader. They have the highest net profit margin, the highest total asset turnover. And whenever you look at Under Armour, they're going to be the outlier. They're at the bottom of the industry. But the big thing about this chart is that it shows the intensity of rivalry because of how close the numbers really are. Besides Under Armour being at the lowest end and Nike being at the highest end, their total asset turnovers are all very close, and the inventory turnovers are very close. And the life cycle of our direct competitors are all in their mature phase, so they're not seeing these large growth rates. But whenever we look at our indirect competitors, they're in the growth phase, so they'll be making a lot bigger growth than these companies. So looking at this, comparing our direct competitors to our indirect competitors, debt is important whenever we're looking at uh, our direct competitors, because they are using this debt, this long-term debt, to fund their endorsements and sponsorships. Whenever I was looking at Nike's 10K, you could see that they only have 1.3 billion due within the next year of their long-term debt, but the rest of their 7 billion is due past 12 months. And then liabilities, you can see that our direct competitors hold more liabilities and they have a faster receivables turnover. So looking at the tie ratio and the bond ratings, Nike has an AA minus, Adidas has an A minus, and Under Armour has a BB. And this is important because they're taking on so much debt to fund their warehouses, their retail stores, and their endorsement contracts. So they need to be able to make sure that they can pay their interest expense. And you can see Nike's all the way at 22.3 times, but someone like Adidas, who has an A minus bond rating, it's actually been dropping within the last few years. It's dropped once every year, and that's because they're holding such a low tie ratio, only at 5.3 times. And here we're going to decompose the ROE for all of these companies. You can see that the total asset turnover is very similar for all of these companies, but the big thing is going to be the net profit margin and the equity multiplier. Nike has a very high net profit margin compared to the rest of the industry, along with they have a lot more debt, which is why they have a lot higher of an equity multiplier, which boosts their ROE even more. Under Armour has the lowest net profit margin, but they have the second most amount of debt, which it doesn't really get them all that far to only 2.61% ROE. And that's because of their net profit margin being so low. So conclusion, our advice would be to make sure that you find your market and differentiate yourself if you're looking to come into the industry, like a Lululemon, who specializes on a higher level of not premium, or not high end, but it's somewhere in between premium and high end women's clothing and yoga clothing, and On Cloud, who's focusing on comfortable and stylish shoes that can be worn for work that a lot of nurses wear. I would not try to come in and compete with the direct competitors, as it would be difficult because you do have to take on this large amount of debt and this large amount of fixed assets. And we would also say that e-commerce is an opportunity for those in the market or in the industry that are not competing in it yet, and those coming into the industry have a big opportunity with e-commerce. And invest. So the compound annual growth rate is 4% over the next 5 years for this industry, which is relatively low. And that, along with inflation, keeps increasing, consumer preference changes, consumers are also having less disposable income. We believe that you should not invest in this because eventually there's going to be a downturn in this industry.